Hey folks, today I have with me Mike Perlo, CTO of Alchemist. Hi Mike.
Hi, hello everyone. Hi, how are you doing?
All good, all good. I'm very pleased to meet you. Please, can you introduce yourself to the viewers?
Yeah, and I'll be a bit boring, and I'll use a presentation for that if you don't mind, and for the rest of the talks. So I'll just share the screen. So yeah, I'm Mike Perloff. I'm a former data engineer. I was doing data engineering. I was a data architect. I was a consultant. I even had like 100 people working for me at some point. But basically, I was doing data, right, and analytics and everything when it was still called data warehousing. So before the lake house, I guess. And now at some point I figured out that I can help people like me or the customers to kind of improve efficiency when they essentially migrate systems and work with data engineering. So I built a tool and still building with the team that is helping to convert. Specifically in our case, we're focusing on SAS, which is one of the legacy systems, but generally a conversion and analysis tool for code. That's me.
Yeah, and I checked your resume or like your LinkedIn page, and I was amazed. Like your resume is so big. You did so many things. So I understand like uh, how you were able to let's say to build Alchemist. And by the way, can you tell us more about Alchemist?
Yeah, I so this talk in general today, I wanted to address two things that are it's not related to Alchemist itself. It's related to migrations and the things we're working with. And I hope it will be helpful to anyone. So it doesn't matter which technology. I mean, you're obviously migrating to Databricks, I expect, because that's the technology, but it doesn't matter where you're coming from, right? And Alchemist, I will just, my experience is coming from specifically Alchemist and the customers that we're working with, right, on migrations. And you'll see, I'll show Alchemist is just one of the tools that people use to automate portions of migrations and make it, well, feasible, cheaper, and more efficient, basically. So it is a code converter. I will briefly show what Alchemist does, but mostly this is a general discussion, and also a discussion of, well, where the LLMs, what's their role in this whole process, obviously. So we all know about LLMs, and we can just ignore them, right?
Of course. And I'm curious to know, do you migrate specifically from cloud to Databricks, or you also target the on-premise migrations?
So I'm actually part of a consulting, like a small consult, still a consulting company. Is we just I'm like a startup within a company, and I'm strictly focused on the software portion that is specifically related to the SaaS code migration, which is usually on premise because they only recently started doing cloud versions of it, right? So I'm focused on the old, like legacy migrations. What I will be saying is probably relevant to cloud migrations as well. So, for example, if you want to migrate Redshift to Databricks, you would probably have at least some of the same issues and some of the same questions, and you would also probably use similar tools to Alchemist to do the migration, and you would probably use the AI in the same fashion as well.
And can you walk us through the process that you follow in order to have a successful migration? Like, what are the steps we need to follow?
Sure. So in general, well, usually the migration, and I will kind of touch upon that as well. I wanted to touch upon that, but in general, migration is you need to assess, right, what you migrate, and it's actually very important is when you're migrating legacy stuff. It's usually huge, right? And this is I will be talking about the costs you'll see, and it's very important to understand what to migrate and remove stuff you don't want to migrate because that's one of the ways how to reduce the costs. So this is the first thing you do. Then a very important thing is to phase it out. So trying to migrate, if you can, to migrate in phases is much better way to get to success. And so you have to plan. And then within each, like as you walking through the phases, you build up some knowledge about how you migrate. You build up some, let's say, if you're using models, AI models, you may be fine-tuning them to know your code better. Or if you're using tools like Alchemist or other tools, you building configurations for these tools, and you basically scale out and you speed up with your migration. So the third step is basically, well, the scale out portion, right? Where you do a bigger phases and quicker and more efficient. So roughly 3 steps: assess, plan, do a first phase or a couple of simple phases, and then scale out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm really curious to see it. I'll be waiting for the slides, how you're able to add the Gen AI to this migration process.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, I actually wanted to touch 2 topics because and AI is the second topic, so wait for it. But basically, I wanted to first touch one thing that unfortunately most people kind of miss on is the cost and why it still may, and sometimes the people who do realize the full cost of migration, why it's still worth it, and then how Gen AI and tools like Alchemist or other static analysis tools actually help to bring down the cost to some manageable levels, right? So, and regarding the costs, right? I have this, my kids are in elementary school, so they get like problems of the day like that. So I just use the analogy. So, like, you imagine you like a big enterprise, right? And you have 20, and sometimes it could be 50 analysts, developers, whoever is working on your data infrastructure. And they've been doing it for 10 years, and you have a huge system, you have reports and ETLs and whatnot, right? And they worked on it for 10 years, right? And you also paying, let's say, for some legacy system, you're paying for a license and hardware, I don't know, maybe 50,000 K a year. So the question, how much should you budget for a migration? So most of our customers actually ask this question, usually before we join into the fray. I think Databricks is usually the same. So the typical thinking is, well, the good project is the one that has ROI in 1 year, and by ROI thing, people are thinking, okay, Databricks is, well, much cheaper, right? It's going to be much more efficient, so we'll just reduce the cost of the license and hardware, right? And so the project has to be, I don't know, at maximum $500,000 because that's how much we're gonna reduce the costs in not 500, but something like that in a year. So unfortunately, this is not true. In reality, if you would count how much it cost you to build the system in 10 years with 20 people, even if you have very cheap employees, right? It's at least, and I calculated the numbers, you can do it yourself. It's like at least $10 million, maybe $20 million. So unfortunately, no matter how good the automation or whatever, there's just so much knowledge in it that the honest price is 3 million. And if you accepting that the price is lower, you basically setting yourself up for change requests in the future. So you like someone from, or you're not actually talking about the full migration, something like that. So it's important to understand the true cost. And at this point, many enterprises will say, oh, wait a second, why would I even migrate? It's like, it's ridiculous, right? It's just, I mean, it's a 6-year TCO for the current system. And you should bother because the way I think about legacy migrations is that it's essentially a ticking bomb. It may not like you may not have a disaster today, maybe not even tomorrow, but you will. It's essentially the same issue, and it's actually very connected to security, right? So you have all the data breaches right now. There was like a major one, I think, 2 weeks ago. Last week we all heard about it. Like there are a lot of breaches, and they also happen in new systems, obviously. But the reason they happen is because you have a system with a lot of code. No one looked into it. There's a lot of security issues. So by doing a migration, you're not just changing the platform and reducing cost or improving performance. That's not. You also removing the technical debt. You will actually probably remove some legacy parts of your code that is not used, right? You renew the knowledge, right? So your analyst will remember what they're doing, right? And you will be able to onboard and better educate the new people who are joining. So it's very important to renew your system, and this will fix security issues. And again, you may not do migration today. You may think, okay, that's too expensive. I'm gonna postpone it for whatever. But it's eventually the business will break down. Eventually, and I've been there. Your analyst who did a very big ETL job that they executed manually will, let's say, change the company or retire, for example, and suddenly like all the hell broke loose, and it's too late already. And you obviously reduce your, I mean, if you count on 5-year horizon or 6-year horizon, usually you would reduce your TCO as well. So again, migrations are unfortunately still, I mean, at least at this level of LLMs and everything, are still kind of expensive, and not only because of conversion, but other processes, but they still worth it, right? I mean, in my opinion, you don't have a choice. You just have to prioritize which migration, if you probably have multiple in your enterprise, which of them to tackle first. And this where the AI portion comes in. So I don't know, you like this is what you've been waiting for, right?
Exactly.
So will Gen AI solve all the issues?
Mm.
So the answer is, I mean, honestly, I'm the believer that probably Gen AI will replace everything. So eventually, yes, but eventually is we can all speculate when, but definitely not today. It is part of the solution, and I will illustrate this. So what I did is, and this is public, so anyone can open it. I used one of the frontier models, and I gave it. This is slightly obfuscated, but it's a real code from a real customer from SaaS. And you don't have to understand it, but basically it's a more kind of more elaborate. It's not very complicated, but not basic SQL, for example.
Mm.
And I gave the code, and it's poorly commented. The names of the columns are kind of not very descriptive. And the result, this is completely incorrect. So the way the model converted it is entirely incorrect. But bear with me. If you use a more descriptive, like some comments, more descriptive comments, so if your analysts, for example, or developers are doing kind of being more explicit, it suddenly gives you a correct conversion.
More
So
context. That makes sense.
yeah, it kind of, if you give it a context, and what's important, and it will feed into my what is the actual the real solution is if you annotate and give explanations of what each kind of piece of code is doing. And bear with me, this can be done automatically. So the first, what I just showed is subject to how your users are coding, and they can code in different ways. But you can automatically annotate and explain to AI what the thing, like what every piece of the code is doing. And when you annotate this code and run it, again, it produces the correct result. So AI is definitely helpful and getting much better. Even this, like a year ago, none of the frontier models could convert SaaS at all, and now they can. And so they're getting better, right? But essentially, just using AI is not enough. It's important, and also in a big migration, you want to make sure that you establish the code are the same, the patterns are the same, right? So you want to have like you don't want to have random code, like different code. You want this to be, like all the code looks the same. So you have to combine. You have to combine AIs with tools like Alchemist. And here's like, I'll just briefly explain what the tools like Alchemist do. This is from my Alchemist picture, but it applies to anything. So basically you have tools that are like just like compilers that compile, like programmers write in Python, data engineers write in Python, and it executes on machines on Databricks clusters. There is a compiler behind it. The compiler reads the code. There is no LLM. It's just an algorithm that reads the code, understands it, and translates it to machine, so machine can run it. So it's essentially the same technology. It reads the code, but instead of translating this code into machine, like into actually executing it, it can translate it to other code. So for example, we read SAS code and we can translate it to PySpark code that does the same thing. And we can also, and this is important, analyze the code, and we can present the code as data. So we can say, here's what the columns of this table are. We can just guess from the code. Here are the data types. Here's what the statements do. So we have all this knowledge that the AI is lacking. So the optimal architecture that we're going to is basically to combine the power of two. So you take a tool that is statically converting the code, whatever you have, right? So you have Oracle, there are tools for that. If you have, I don't know, if you have Informatica ETL, there are tools for that. And you convert everything that the tool can convert automatically using the tool because it's stable. It will give you the same code all the time. It will be you can set up usually some configurations so you'll get what you want. And then it annotates the remaining code that it can convert and feeds it into, let's say, like in Databricks, right? You can run any model you want. You can fine-tune the model on your code. It feeds it into that code. And this whole framework is the optimal in terms of efficiency today. So until LLMs are more smarter than all the humans, like in a broader sense, and they can do the task end to end, this is the way. And you don't have to believe me. I also left, I don't know, Yusuf, you can like probably add this link. Slack team did a awesome, very long, it's a kind of long read. It's a technical article where they were migrating from one Java testing library to another Java testing library, and they actually implemented this from scratch. And they have the case study includes like how many hours they estimated it will take manually, what challenges they had with LLMs, and how they addressed them. But basically, there are cases where people successfully use that. And this is how our teams are using Alchemist, like our users and clients use that, right? So they use Alchemist for everything that can be automatically converted. And they feed the metadata that Alchemist provides into, well, LLMs if the customer allows it, or at least into some frameworks that they set up. So this is what I suggest. And this is the state-of-the-art optimal approach right now. It may be different in a year. The speed of innovation right now is very high, but that's basically it.
And I've seen that you're pointing out to Llama, Code Llama. Like how many models have you tried, and have you noticed any difference in regarding the performance or?
Yeah. I can. So first of all, it heavily depends on the kind of legacy system you have. So some systems, like for example, if you're migrating from Postgre, there's a lot of open source code in there, and they are, or MySQL, for example, right? So there's actually very good tools to automatically convert the SQL code without any use of LLMs already, and then LLMs know the language really well. There are still SQL specific, like for example, DuckDB. They introduced their DuckDB fine-tuned model for SQL conversion. Also, obviously, the SQL itself is very simple, but usually in the big systems, there's procedural languages, right? So in Oracle, you have PL SQL, for example. In Postgre, you have PG-SQL and all of that stuff. So this is trickier because then it's harder to convert. But again, the more open and open sourced, I guess, the system, the better the out-of-the-box models will be. So SAS is closed, so it's almost impossible to find. Like you have some code open source, right? There's some stuff on the internet, but for example, SAS is very specific. It has non-typical structure, like it has language that doesn't have analog, right, in the modern world. So it would struggle more, and it would make even more sense for you to fine tune the model. So if you going through migration and you have things that people rewritten themselves, you can fine tune it, right? Same goes to other legacy systems, right? Even, for example, we've been working with Teradata code. There are open source SQL converters. So you would expect that maybe Teradata is handled, but apparently these open source converters do not handle some of the common stuff that we've seen in real life exercises. So because Teradata is inherently enterprise system, there's not so much open code for just typical frontier models to learn. So it really depends. And it does make sense to if you're scaling it out, you would probably start with a smaller model, right? You may train DBRX, or you can use whatever, I know, Code Llama, and you can fine tune it. I would say I was really surprised. I actually tried it before this recording, the recent frontier models on SAS. I was actually surprised they got much better. I don't know how they did that. I honestly don't understand where they got some understanding of SAS, but in some cases you will need to defer to, I guess, frontier models. And I don't know. I mean, I can mention which ones, but I guess everyone knows there's like there's what, 2, 3 of frontier models. So yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, that's I really love the process and how it was developed. It it can give you more confidence on when it comes to migrating the code. Of course, not everything can be streamlined. You will still need to do some tweaking, but if you can offload some tasks that it's still, let's say, can help this process and make it maybe, let's say, cheaper.
It is. I mean, without that. So remember, I said about the costs.
Yeah.
So when I said like the costs of migration are proportional to the cost of building the whole thing, right? So if you've built it for 10 years, it will be proportional. If you're doing it literally manually, if you just like sit down with a bunch of developers who would just like look at the old code and try to rewrite it, the cost can easily be the exact same amount as the whole system. I mean, honestly, there's no way you can convert in time or at cost. So you have to use automation. I'm just saying that this is the most effective way how you can reduce the like this is you can go better than that. And the testing is very important. And actually, most of the time in migration is spent not on the conversion of the code. This is not this. The most of the time goes into testing and fixing the discrepancies, because the code may look correct and may even execute, but it will give you different results on real data, and you need to run on full data, and it usually takes time. And so having tests, especially auto-generated tests, is as crucial as using automation for code conversion. And again, static analysis tools, unlike AI, LLMs can help you generate the tests, because again, LLMs will not give you consistent tests, right? You can rely on, and you have to rely on some classical analysis of the language to do that.
And by the way, I read the blog post. I think it has been released maybe 2 years ago on
Mm-hmm.
the 4 steps to migrate SaaS data warehouse
Mm-hmm.
lakehouse. I think that was in September 2022, and I've seen
Yeah.
like the steps similar, but now we have, let's say, the help of the Gen AI or the fine tuning to.
Yes, absolutely. Because this post was written, I think I maybe I was one of the authors. I don't
Yeah,
remember.
yeah,
This
you
was
were, yeah, you were one of
Yeah,
the.
it was written. I think it was written before ChatGPT announcement. So we were using for development. I was using Copilot, which actually came before ChatGPT. So I knew about the stuff, but we all haven't seen yet how effective it is, in general sense. So yeah, this was, as I said, 2 years passed, and the recommendation is slightly different, I would say. Maybe I don't know, in 5 years, we'll get super intelligence, and I mean, all of this will be moot. We'll just, okay, here's Sam Altman built $1 trillion data center, and it just it just doesn't.
Or maybe
Or we don't.
quantum computing, who knows?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. So it's honestly, I can say I'm not trying to predict future, but I can tell you right now that's the way to go.
And before closing, is there any advice you want to give to anyone or any team who will go through this process?
Well, one advice is be honest with yourself when you do at least internal estimates. And if you understand it's a lot, go phase by phase, start small, do like a small project. You'll see the value yourself. You will prove the value for the general organization. You will learn stuff, right? So do not be discouraged, right? And the second advice is obviously keep pace with the how Gen AI is kind of evolving, because again, this may change. And third is definitely don't overlook the testing, right? So if someone tells you that we're gonna convert your code for whatever, a penny, and they don't, and it doesn't include any testing, it like basically you're only looking at 20% of your costs potentially. So make sure that you, when you think about the costs for you, you think about how you're gonna test it on your data. That's very important.
And I think I forgot, but I want to ask you to show us what Alchemist looks like.
I mean, yeah, I didn't want like I didn't want to brag. So Alchemist, honestly, it's really boring. If I would show the kind of the conversion piece, but like as I said, we have two things. One is analyzing the data, and another one is converting. So this is how our dashboards look. This is basically data based on the code in case of SaaS, right? So it does all kinds of fancy stuff. It understands what kind of code and classifies it. It gives you some complexity. So usually the way people use that is they start by understanding their environment, as I said, and figuring out what they need to address, right? So and how complex the task is, right? How much code do we have? That kind of stuff. And there's also a conversion. I honestly I didn't prepare. I can show like maybe converting some code, but essentially it's a CLI tool that will just spit out the converted code into notebooks. It has some fancy features because I'm a former consultant and basically building a tool for consultants mostly and customers. We're trying to build a tool that is convenient to use in the context of migration, right? So it has some features, not just converting code, but giving you, I don't know, if you want source, giving you some information and helping you to feed that into LLMs when it just can't convert.
You're basically filling the gap that you faced when you were a consultant.
Yeah, we were using other tools. We didn't like the other tools for our purposes. We thought it didn't make our migrations efficient. So I just sat down, and I've been a developer. Like my background is in development, so I'm like, oh, whatever. I will code this thing myself. So yes, we're trying to make a consultant or an internal engineer work easier, right? To make migrations as feasible, as cheap, and as efficient as possible, basically.
And by the way, for those who are watching the recording, we're gonna be sharing in the description of the video all the links that Mike was showing. And I would like really thank you for your time. It was a very insightful discussion. Thanks to you, I know more and more about the process and how it can be done. And any closing on your side, like?
No, thanks all, Yusuf. I really appreciate the opportunity. I know I'm talking a lot. Maybe there's going to be a lengthier video on it, but I hope people will enjoy it. Feel free to reach out to us, or even maybe you want to ask. I can recommend tools for other whatever languages. I know at least a couple. So always happy to talk.
Thank you, Michael. Sorry, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, and I'll,
That's important
I
to
have
clear.
I have the right tea right on me, so yeah.
Wish you a good day.
Yeah, you too. You too. Bye bye.